Clara was 19 when her eyes met a billionaire's in the middle of a snowstorm. She was invisible in that world of crystal and luxury until Adrian saw her. One look, a dangerous invitation, one night that would change everything. But when she cried out in pain in that silent suite on the 12th floor, he discovered the truth she'd been hiding. And nothing, not the money, not the desire, would be enough to erase what happened between them. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and become a member for early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the super thanks button. Your support makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing stories that move you. Snow fell thick over Aspen that winter night, covering the Colorado mountains with a white blanket that seemed to muffle any sound from the outside world. Inside the Grand Alpine Resort, nature's silence contrasted violently with the artificial buzz of the elite, polite laughter, clinking glasses, high heels echoing across Italian marble. The air was heavy with expensive perfumes, the kind that cost more than Clara made in an entire month. She held the silver tray with both hands, trying not to shake, not from the cold she'd left outside, but from the suffocating feeling of not belonging in that place. Clara was 19 and carried a weight on her shoulders that no one in that room could imagine. Her hands, rough from washing so many dishes and wiping down tables, held champagne flutes that cost more than her overdue rent. She wore a simple black uniform, hair pulled back in a tight bun, and subtle makeup that hid the dark circles from poorly slept nights. Every step she took among those men in Italian suits and women in haute couture dresses was a cruel reminder. She was invisible. The shadow, just another piece of the decor, useful only for serving and disappearing. But Clara wasn't there by choice. She was there because her mother's hospital bill had come due the week before, because the chemotherapy treatment couldn't wait, because giving up had never been an option, even when everything inside her screamed it was too late. So she smiled politely, avoided condescending looks, and pretended it didn't hurt. Pretended she didn't feel her chest tighten every time someone called her over, with just a snap of their fingers, as if she were a pet. On the other side of the room, leaning against a white marble column, Adrian Castellane observed it all with a distant, almost bored look. He was 33 but seemed to carry the weariness of someone much older. His tailored suit molded perfectly to his tall, athletic body, but it couldn't hide the rigidity of someone who'd learned to control every movement, every word, every emotion. His face was attractive in an almost intimidating way, a sharp jawline, deep grey eyes that rarely revealed what he was thinking, and an upright posture that communicated power without needing to say a word. Adrian hated events like this, hated the fakeness, the rehearsed smiles, the empty conversations about stock prices and yachts in the Mediterranean. But he was there because his presence was expected, because billionaires like him had social obligations, because in the world's eyes, Adrian Castellane was a man who had everything: companies on 4 continents, mansions in cities most people only saw in magazines, cars that cost more than entire houses. But no one saw the emptiness. No one noticed that beneath all that armor of success, there was a man who hadn't felt anything in years, until his eyes met hers. It was a strange moment, almost impossible to explain. Clara was passing by with the tray, trying not to bump into anyone, when she felt the weight of someone's gaze on her. Instinctively, she turned her head, and there he was, Adrian, standing still, looking directly at her, as if everything around them had disappeared. It wasn't the look of someone asking for a drink. It wasn't the look of someone who saw her as staff. It was something else, something that made her stop in the middle of the room, heart racing, without understanding why. The world seemed to slow down. The music in the background, people's laughter, the clinking of glasses, everything became muffled, as if someone had placed thick glass between her and the rest of the universe. Adrian didn't look away. He studied her with an intensity Clara had never felt before, as if he were trying to decipher something in her. And then, for the first time in months, Clara felt something different from the exhaustion that accompanied her every day. She felt heat rise up her neck, her cheeks flush, her heart beat in an uneven rhythm that frightened her. She quickly looked away, scared by her own reaction, and kept walking. But she could feel him still watching, felt his presence even without looking. It was as if an invisible thread had connected between the two of them, and each step she took away only stretched that thread tighter, without ever breaking it. 20 minutes later, Clara was on the outdoor terrace, breathing deeply in the freezing night air. She needed to pull herself together, needed to understand what the hell had just happened in there. She leaned against the glass railing, watching the snow fall slowly over the illuminated pine trees. The cold burned her face, but it was a welcome relief after the suffocating heat of the ballroom. "You're not from here, are you?" The voice came from behind her, low, steady, with a slight accent Clara couldn't place. She turned, startled, and there he was. Adrian. Closer than she expected. Too close. He held a glass of whiskey, but didn't seem interested in drinking it. His eyes were fixed on her, with the same intensity as before. Clara swallowed hard, trying to maintain professional composure. "No, sir, I'm from Denver. I'm just here for the event." Adrian gave a half smile, almost imperceptible. "Adrian. Call me Adrian. Sir makes me sound like my father, and I already have enough problems without that." There was something about the way he spoke, a dry tone but not cold, melancholic but not desperate. Clara felt he was trying to ease the tension, but at the same time there was a sadness between the lines that she recognized. The sadness of someone who smiles because it's expected, not because they feel like it. "Clara," she replied, not knowing why she was telling him her name. "Clara," he repeated as if testing the sound on his lips. "Pretty name. It suits you." She didn't know what to say. No one had ever told her something like that. Not in a way that seemed genuine. Not in a way that made her feel like she actually mattered. Adrian moved a little closer, leaning against the railing beside her, but keeping a respectful distance. The scent of his cologne, something woody, subtle, masculine, invaded Clara's senses. She felt the warmth of his presence, even though he wasn't touching her. It was a strange proximity, both comfortable and dangerous at the same time. "You were watching the snow before I got here," he said, looking at the mountains. "What were you thinking about?" Clara hesitated. She could lie, could say something vague, polite, safe. But there was something about this man that made her want to be honest. "I was thinking that down there, in the ballroom, I'm invisible. But out here, with the snow falling and the silence, I feel real." Adrian slowly turned his face to her. His gray eyes gleamed with something Clara couldn't name. Surprise, recognition. "I know exactly what you mean," he murmured. And then it happened. He leaned in slightly, not to kiss her but to speak closer, as if he wanted only her to hear. His breath touched the skin of her ear, sending a shiver down Clara's spine that made her hold her breath. "Do you want to get out of here?" he asked, his voice even lower. "Somewhere we can actually talk, without all this performance." Clara should have said no, should have backed away, thanked him politely, and gone back to work. But her heart was beating so hard, it felt like it wanted to burst out of her chest. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't want to be sensible. She looked into his eyes, saw something there, a loneliness that mirrored her own, and simply nodded. Adrian smiled. A real smile this time. Small, but genuine. "I'll meet you at the back exit in 10 minutes. And then he walked away, going back inside the ballroom as if nothing had happened, leaving Clara alone on the terrace, trembling, but not from cold. 10 minutes later, she walked out through the staff door, heart pounding in her chest, hands sweating inside her gloves. Part of her expected him not to be there, that all of this was a cruel joke from someone bored. But he was there, leaning against an elegant black car, hands in his coat pockets, watching the snow fall with a thoughtful expression. When he saw Clara, he straightened up. "You came," he said, and there was genuine surprise in his voice. Clara stopped a few steps away, still uncertain. "Can I still go back?" she asked, more to herself than to him. Adrian studied her for a long moment. Then, with that half smile that was already starting to disarm all of Clara's defenses, he replied, "You can, but you won't." And he was right. Clara took another step and then another, until she was beside the car, heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. Adrian opened the door for her, unhurried, no pressure, just waiting. And when Clara finally got in, feeling the soft leather of the seat and the warmth of the heater, she knew something inside her had changed. There was no going back. As the car glided through the snow-covered streets, Clara looked out the window and saw her reflection in the glass. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't just see a tired, invisible girl. She saw someone who had just made a choice. A dangerous choice. A choice that could change everything. The car glided through Aspen's silent streets as if floating over the snow. Outside, thick flakes fell, illuminated by streetlights that created golden halos in the darkness. Inside the vehicle, the silence was different from what Clara had experienced before. It wasn't the heavy silence of loneliness, but something more intimate, almost tangible, as if they were both trapped in a bubble separate from the rest of the world. Clara kept her hands clasped in her lap, trying to control the trembling that had nothing to do with cold. She could feel Adrian's presence beside her, the woody scent of his cologne, the low, controlled sound of his breathing, the way his fingers rested lightly on the steering wheel, with a quiet confidence that contrasted with the storm she felt inside her chest. Adrian didn't speak during the first few minutes. He seemed comfortable with the silence, like someone used to being alone. But Clara felt the weight of the moment, felt that each passing second was a choice she was making, staying there with this man she didn't know, driving to a place she didn't know where. Part of her screamed that this was crazy. The other part, the part that was tired of being invisible, tired of never choosing anything for herself, that part wanted to stay. "You're nervous," Adrian said suddenly, without taking his eyes off the road. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, said with such natural certainty that Clara saw no point in denying it. "A little," she admitted, looking out the window to avoid facing him. "I don't usually do this." "Do what?" he asked, and there was a touch of genuine curiosity in his voice. "Get in cars with strangers, leave in the middle of work, anything that isn't safe." Adrian let out a low sound, almost a laugh, but without humor. "Safe," he repeated, as if the word had a bitter taste. "I spent my whole life being safe, Clara, doing everything right, following the rules. And you know what I got from that?" She finally looked at him. He still kept his eyes fixed on the road, but there was tension in his jaw, a stiffness in his shoulders that revealed more than his words. "What?" Clara asked, almost whispering. Adrian paused, as if deciding whether or not to answer. Then, with a sincerity that caught her off guard, he said, "Nothing that really mattered." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Clara felt something tighten in her chest. She knew that kind of emptiness, knew the feeling of being surrounded by things, responsibilities, obligations, expectations, and still feeling like there was nothing real there. "Where are we going?" she asked, changing the subject before the conversation got too heavy. "Somewhere we can actually talk," Adrian replied, and for the first time since they'd gotten in the car, he glanced at her. The look lasted only a second, but it was enough time for Clara to feel the impact. There was intensity in those grey eyes, but also something softer, more vulnerable, without all that fakeness, without having to pretend. 5 minutes later, the car stopped in front of an elegant building, all glass and steel, with soft lights illuminating the entrance. Clara recognized the place. It was one of Aspen's most exclusive hotels, the kind of place she only saw from afar, where rooms cost more per night than she made in a month. Adrian got out of the car and walked around to her side, opening the door with a natural, almost chivalrous gesture. Clara hesitated for a moment before accepting the hand he extended. When their fingers touched, she felt an electric shock run up her arm, subtle but undeniable. Adrian felt it too. She could tell by the way his fingers closed around hers for a second longer than necessary. They entered the lobby, and Clara immediately felt out of place. Her simple work clothes seemed to scream that she didn't belong there. But Adrian walked beside her with such ease that she felt, at least for a moment, that maybe she had the right to be there, that maybe she was more than just a temporary waitress. The elevator was mirrored, and Clara avoided her own reflection. Adrian, on the other hand, watched her, not invasively but attentively, as if trying to decipher something she herself didn't understand. "Do you do this often?" Clara asked suddenly, trying to break the tension that grew with each floor they climbed. "Do what?" "Bring people you barely know to your hotel." Adrian turned completely to her, and the small space of the elevator suddenly felt even smaller. He was close. Too close. Clara could see details she hadn't noticed before, the small lines around his eyes, the slight weariness that his upright posture tried to hide, the way he looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and something deeper she couldn't name. "Never," he said, with a seriousness that made her believe him. "I never do this." The elevator doors opened before Clara could respond, revealing a silent, luxurious hallway. Adrian guided her to a door at the end, unlocking it with a keycard. When he opened the door and turned on the lights, Clara held her breath. It wasn't just a room, it was a suite, huge, elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed a stunning view of the snow-covered mountains. The decor was minimalist, but every detail screamed luxury. Designer furniture, artwork on the walls, an electric fireplace that perfectly mimicked real fire. But what impressed Clara most was the silence. It was a deep, almost sacred silence that contrasted violently with the constant noise that filled her life. Adrian closed the door behind them and headed to the minibar, taking off his coat and tossing it over an armchair with a casual gesture. "Wine," he offered, already holding an expensive bottle. Clara nodded, not trusting her own voice. She approached the windows, unable to look away from the view. Outside, the snowstorm continued, but in here, everything seemed suspended in time. Adrian approached, extending a glass to her. Their fingers touched again when she accepted it, and this time Clara didn't try to hide the shiver that ran through her body. Adrian noticed. She saw it in his eyes, the way his pupils dilated slightly, the way he hesitated before pulling away. They sat on the sofa, a respectful distance between them, but Clara could feel the warmth emanating from his body, could feel the electric tension that filled the space. "You haven't said much about yourself," Adrian said, leaning slightly toward her. His voice was low, intimate, as if they were sharing secrets. "Who is Clara?" She took a sip of wine, trying to buy time. How could she sum up her life in a few words? How could she explain the sleepless nights, the bills piling up, the constant fear that she wouldn't be enough? "There's not much to tell," she began, but Adrian shook his head. "I don't believe that. Everyone has a story. Some just hide it better than others." Clara looked at him, and for the first time since meeting him, she felt she could be honest. Not completely. There were still walls she wasn't ready to tear down. But enough. "My mother is sick," she said, and her voice trembled slightly. "Cancer, advanced stage, and I do what I can. Work wherever I can. Try to pay for treatment. Try to give her more time." Adrian didn't say anything immediately. Just watched her, with an intensity that made her feel exposed but not judged. "And you?" he finally asked. "Who takes care of you, Clara?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked that. No one had ever cared. She felt her eyes burn, but blinked quickly, pushing the tears away before they could fall. "No one," she admitted, with an honesty that scared her. "I take care of myself." Adrian leaned in even closer, and suddenly he was so near that Clara could see every detail of his face, could feel his warm breath brushing her skin. He slowly raised his hand, giving her time to pull back if she wanted, and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was soft, almost reverent, but it sent a wave of heat through Clara's body that made her hold her breath. Adrian let his fingers slide lightly along the side of her face, a touch so light it almost seemed imaginary, but one that left her trembling. "Down there, I was invisible," Clara whispered, unable to look away from his eyes. "Here, you saw me." Adrian closed his eyes for a moment, as if her words had touched something deep inside him. When he opened them again, there was something different there, something raw, vulnerable, dangerous. "Clara," he said, his voice hoarse, "you have no idea how much I see you." And then slowly, as if giving her all the time in the world to say no, he moved closer. Clara felt her heart race, blood pulse in her veins, every nerve in her body awaken. She knew she should pull back, knew this was crazy. But she couldn't move. When his lips brushed hers, soft, questioning, waiting for permission, Clara closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt alive. The kiss was brief, almost timid, but left Clara trembling in a way no cold ever had. When Adrian pulled away, his eyes remained closed for a second longer, as if he were trying to engrave that moment in his memory. Clara could hear her own breathing, fast, uneven, revealing the chaos she felt inside. She pulled back slightly, creating a safe space between them, but her fingers still touched his on the sofa, as if they couldn't completely let go. Adrian slowly opened his eyes and looked at her with an intensity that made Clara's stomach flip. It wasn't just desire. There was something deeper there, something that scared and attracted her at the same time. He ran his hand through his hair, an action that seemed more like a gesture from someone trying to regain control than anything rehearsed. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice lower than before. "I shouldn't have—" "Don't," Clara interrupted him, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "Don't apologize." She didn't know where that courage came from. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was the exhaustion of always doing what was expected, or maybe it was simply because, for the first time, someone looked at her as if she mattered, as if she were more than just a shadow passing unnoticed. Adrian studied her for a long moment, and Clara saw the internal struggle happening behind those grey eyes. He stood from the sofa with a controlled movement, walking to the window. He stood there, his back to her, watching the snowstorm that continued outside. The soft light from the fireplace illuminated his profile, creating shadows that made him seem even more distant, more unreachable. Clara remained seated, holding the wine glass with both hands, feeling the warmth of the liquid control the trembling in her fingers. She watched Adrian's broad back, the way his shoulders were tense, the way he shoved his hands in his pants pockets, as if trying to keep himself from doing something he might regret. The silence stretched between them, no longer comfortable, but charged with something unspoken. Clara felt the urge to fill that void, to say something that would break the tension threatening to suffocate her. "Can I ask you something?" she finally said. Adrian turned his head slightly, enough for her to see his profile. "Sure." "Why me?" The words came out before she could censor them. "I mean, you could have anyone at that event. Women who belong in your world. So why did you bring me here?" Adrian was silent for so long that Clara began to think he wouldn't answer. But then he turned completely to face her, and the vulnerability she saw on his face caught her off guard. "Because you were the only real person in that room," he said with brutal honesty. "Everyone else was wearing masks, fake smiles, empty conversations, feigned interest. But you, when I looked at you, I saw someone who was there out of necessity, not choice, someone who was fighting. And He paused, as if the next words cost him dearly. "I haven't felt like that in a long time. Real." Clara felt something tighten in her chest. She placed her wineglass on the coffee table and stood, walking slowly toward him. Adrian didn't move, just watched her approach, with that intense look that seemed to see right through her. When she stopped just inches from him, she could feel the warmth of his body, could see the way his breathing subtly quickened. She raised her hand, hesitant, and lightly touched his chest, feeling his heart beating rapidly beneath the expensive shirt. "You're scared too," she whispered, more a statement than a question. Adrian covered her hand with his, pressing it against his chest, as if he wanted her to feel the truth of what he would say next. "Terrified," he admitted, and there was a sad smile on his lips. "Because this shouldn't make sense, but it does." Clara felt her legs weaken, not because of the words themselves, but because of the way he said them, as if each syllable were pulled from somewhere deep inside him, from a place he'd kept locked for years. Adrian released her hand and moved away again, creating physical distance as if that could protect him from what he was feeling. He walked to the minibar and poured something stronger than wine, whiskey by the smell. He drank it all at once, and Clara saw the way his jaw tightened with the bitter taste. "I was married," he said suddenly without looking at her. 5 years, she was yet perfect on paper, beautiful, intelligent, from a good family. Everyone said we were the ideal couple. Clara said nothing, just waited, sensing he needed to let this out. "But she hated me," Adrian continued, with a bitterness he didn't try to hide. "Not at first, but over time. She said I was incapable of love, that I was cold, distant, a machine that knew how to make money, but didn't know how to feel anything. He finally turned to look at Clara, and his eyes shone with raw emotion. And maybe she was right, because I spent so much time building empires, closing deals, proving I was more than just the son of an absent father, that I forgot how to connect, how to feel anything other than anger or ambition. Until tonight, Clara finished softly. Adrian nodded slowly, and for the first time, she saw something that looked like genuine fear on his face. Until you. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Clara felt tears burn behind her eyes but didn't let them fall. She crossed the space between them again, this time without hesitation, and stood in front of him, so close she could see the small golden flecks in his grey eyes. "I forgot too," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I forgot what it's like to want something for myself. I lived to keep my mother alive, to pay bills, to survive another day. But tonight, when you looked at me, I remembered there's still something inside me that wants more than just to survive." Adrian raised his hand and touched her face with a gentleness that contrasted with the intensity of the moment. His fingers traced the line of her jaw, slid along the side of her neck, and Clara felt every cell in her body awaken with that touch. "Stay," he whispered, and there was a plea in his voice that completely undid her. "Just for tonight. Just the two of us. No past, no future. Just now." Clara knew she should say no, knew this was dangerous, that she was playing with fire, that the next morning all of this would be just a painful memory. But when she looked into his eyes and saw the same fear, the same need, the same loneliness that haunted her every night, she couldn't refuse. "Just tonight," she repeated, like an agreement sealed between two wounded souls. Adrian closed his eyes for a moment, as if silently giving thanks. When he opened them, there was a determination there that hadn't been before. He leaned in, and this time the kiss wasn't hesitant. It was deep, desperate, full of years of loneliness being poured into a single moment. Clara surrendered completely, her arms wrapping around his neck, her fingers intertwining in his hair. Adrian pulled her closer, eliminating any space between their bodies, and she could feel his heart beating against hers, a chaotic rhythm that matched hers perfectly. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Adrian rested his forehead against hers, and Clara felt his warm breath against her lips. "I don't want to hurt you," he whispered, and there was devastating sincerity in the words. Clara opened her eyes and faced him, seeing all the vulnerability he tried to hide. "Then don't," she answered simply. And in that moment, with the snow falling outside and the world reduced to just that room, those two broken hearts, Clara made the decision that would change everything. She kissed him again, this time with an intensity that revealed her own need, her own hunger for something real. And Adrian responded, his arms enveloping her completely, as if she were the only solid thing in a crumbling world. They didn't know what would come next, didn't know if they would survive the storm they were creating, but in that moment neither of them cared, because for the first time in a long time, they didn't feel alone, and sometimes that was enough. The kiss deepened, and Clara felt the world around her disappear. There was no longer the snowstorm outside, no longer the weight of overdue bills, no longer the constant pain of a life that never seemed enough. There was only Adrian, the warmth of his body against hers, the taste of whiskey on his lips, the way his hands slid down her back with a mixture of urgency and care that made her tremble. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily. Adrian held her face between his hands, his thumbs caressing her cheeks with a tenderness that contrasted with the intensity of the moment. His grey eyes studied her as if trying to memorize every detail. The almost invisible freckles on the bridge of her nose, the way her lips were slightly swollen from the kiss, the brightness in her eyes that revealed both fear and desire. "Come with me," he whispered, and Clara didn't need to ask where. She knew. Adrian guided her through the suite, past the luxurious living room until they reached the bedroom. It was even more impressive than the rest, a king-size bed with impeccable white sheets, another fireplace creating soft golden light, and enormous windows that revealed the view of snow-covered mountains. But what impressed Clara most was the silence. It was a silence unlike any she'd ever experienced, not empty but full of possibilities, unspoken promises, delicious dangers. Adrian turned to her, and for the first time since they entered the room, Clara saw hesitation on his face. He was giving her one last chance to pull back, to say no, to return to the safety of a predictable life. But Clara didn't want safety. Not that night. She took the first step, approaching him slowly. She raised her hands and began unbuttoning his shirt, one button at a time, feeling her fingers tremble slightly. Adrian remained still, watching her with that intense look that made her feel simultaneously exposed and powerful. When the last button came undone, she slid the shirt off his shoulders, revealing his muscular torso marked by some old scars that told stories she didn't know. Clara lightly touched one of the scars, tracing the line with her fingers. "What happened here?" she asked softly. Adrian covered her hand with his, keeping it over the scar. "Motorcycle accident. When I was 23, I was trying to prove something to my father." He gave a bitter smile. "Almost died that day. And you know what he said when I woke up in the hospital. I hope you learned your lesson about irresponsibility." Clara felt her heart tighten. She said nothing, just moved closer and kissed the scar softly, feeling Adrian tremble at the gesture. He pulled her up, making her look into his eyes. "You're the first person who makes this seem not a weakness," he said, his voice hoarse. "It's not a weakness," Clara responded firmly. "It's proof you survived." Adrian kissed her again, but this time there was something different, something slower, deeper, as if he were trying to say with the kiss everything he couldn't express with words. His hands slid along her sides, finding the zipper of her work uniform. He paused, looking into her eyes, waiting for permission. Clara nodded, and he slid the zipper slowly, with a patience that was driving her crazy. The dress fell around her feet, leaving her only in simple lingerie. Nothing fancy, nothing seductive, just basic white cotton she wore because it was practical. Clara felt a wave of insecurity, aware that this probably wasn't the kind of underwear a woman in Adrian's world would wear. But when she looked at him, she saw only pure admiration in his eyes. Adrian looked at her as if she were the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, and for the first time, Clara believed it. "So you're beautiful," he said with a sincerity that made her blush. "I'm ordinary," she replied, almost laughing nervously. "Exactly," Adrian said, pulling her closer. "You're real, and that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." He lifted her in his arms easily, and Clara let out a small, surprised gasp, holding onto his shoulders. Adrian carried her to the bed, laying her gently on the soft sheets. The feeling of the fabric against her skin was almost sensual, so different from the rough old sheets she had at home. Adrian lay beside her, propping himself up on one elbow, and simply watched her for a long moment. Clara felt her heart race under that gaze, felt heat rise up her neck, felt every nerve in her body awaken with anticipation of what would come next. "You're trembling," he observed, sliding a finger along the side of her arm. "I'm nervous," she admitted, seeing no point in lying. Adrian leaned in and kissed her forehead softly. "We can stop," he said, "at any time. You just need to say so." But Clara didn't want to stop. For the first time in her life, she wanted something just for herself, something that wasn't about responsibility, about survival, about being strong enough to make it through another day. She wanted to feel, wanted to be seen, wanted to be touched, as if she mattered. "Don't stop," she whispered. Adrian closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering control. When he opened them, there was an intensity there that made Clara hold her breath. He leaned in and kissed her again, but this time his hands began to explore, sliding down her neck, across her collarbones, slowly down the valley between her breasts, over her stomach, along her hips. Each touch was deliberate, careful, as if he were mapping every inch of her body. Clara arched her back when his fingers found the edge of her panties, her breathing quickening dramatically. Adrian paused, looking into her eyes, waiting for confirmation once more. "Please," she whispered, and she didn't recognize her own voice. It was huskier, more needy, more alive than she remembered sounding. Adrian slid her panties down her legs, slowly, and Clara felt a vulnerability she'd never experienced before. She was completely exposed before him, without shields, without masks, without anything to hide who she really was. And instead of feeling weak, she felt powerful, because Adrian looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. He undressed the rest of the way, and Clara allowed her eyes to explore his body, the defined lines, the scars that told stories, the way each muscle moved beneath his skin. He was beautiful in an almost intimidating way, but it was the way he looked at her that made her feel that maybe, in that moment, they were equals. Adrian positioned himself over her, supporting his own weight with his arms, and Clara felt the warmth of his body enveloping her completely. He kissed her again, on her face, on her neck, on her collarbone, descending slowly, savoring every inch of skin as if he had all the time in the world. When he finally kissed her on the lips again, Clara felt something break inside her, all the barriers she'd built over the years, all the defenses that kept her functioning. Everything crumbled in that moment, and she allowed herself to simply feel. "Clara," Adrian whispered against her lips, and the way he said her name, with so much reverence, so much need, made her eyes burn with unshed tears. "I'm here," she replied, and it was both a statement and a promise. Adrian kissed her deeply, and Clara felt his body move against hers, felt the anticipation grow until it became almost unbearable. And then, slowly, carefully, he drew closer, his eyes never leaving hers, as if he wanted to see every reaction, every emotion that crossed her face. "If it hurts, you stop me," he said, and it was a command, not a request. Clara nodded, holding his shoulders, preparing herself for what would come next. And when he finally touched her in the most intimate way possible, Clara felt the world stop completely. There was warmth, there was pressure, there was the sensation of being filled in a way that went beyond the physical, and for one perfect moment, Clara felt complete. But then came the pain. It wasn't the pain she expected. It wasn't just discomfort or pressure. It was something sharper, more real, more frightening. Clara held her breath, her fingers digging into Adrian's shoulders, her whole body tensing involuntarily. Adrian stopped immediately. "Clara?" There was panic in his voice. "Are you okay?" She wanted to answer, wanted to say everything was fine, that he could continue. But the pain was growing and she couldn't form words. All that came out was a strangled sound, something between a moan and a sob. And then, when the pain became too much, Clara screamed. It wasn't a dramatic scream. It wasn't the kind of sound she'd imagined making in that moment. It was a real scream, raw, of genuine pain that echoed through the silent suite like a deafening alarm. Adrian pulled away instantly, his eyes wide with shock and horror. And that's when he saw it. The blood. The silence that followed the scream was deafening. Adrian pulled away completely, sitting on the edge of the bed with his hands visibly trembling. He looked at his own hands as if they belonged to someone else, as if they had committed a crime he couldn't comprehend. The blood, just a few drops on the immaculate white sheet, seemed to scream a truth that neither of them was prepared to face. Clara curled up, pulling the sheet to cover her body, feeling the throbbing pain mixed with a deep humiliation that burned more than any physical wound. The tears finally fell, silent and uncontrollable, streaming down her cheeks as she tried to process what had just happened. She wanted to disappear, wanted the floor to open up and swallow her, wanted to be anywhere but there, in that luxurious room, under Adrian's devastated gaze. "You were a virgin," Adrian said, and it wasn't a question. It was a statement loaded with disbelief, guilt, and something that felt a lot like betrayal. He ran his hands through his hair, pulling hard, as if the physical pain could somehow compensate for what he felt inside. "Why didn't you tell me?" Clara couldn't look at him. She kept her eyes fixed on her own hands, on her bitten nails, on her cuticles damaged from so much work. Her voice came out small, broken, almost inaudible. "Because you wouldn't have brought me here if you'd known." Adrian turned sharply to face her, and Clara finally found the courage to look at him. What she saw in his eyes destroyed her. It wasn't anger, it was something worse. It was horror. Horror at what he'd done, at what she'd allowed, at how all of this was wrong in so many ways he didn't even know where to start. "Exactly!" he exploded, getting up from the bed and starting to pace back and forth completely naked, but with no awareness of it. "Because this shouldn't have happened like this. Not this way, not with someone like me." "Someone like you?" Clara repeated, feeling a spark of anger begin to burn through the humiliation. "What does that mean?" Adrian stopped pacing and looked at her with an intensity that made her pull back. "It means I'm not the kind of man who deserves to be someone's first experience," he said, his voice loud but not exactly shouting. It was more desperation than anger. I'm complicated, Clara. I'm broken. I don't know how to do this right. I don't know how to be what you need." "I never asked you to be anything," Clara shot back, and now the tears were from anger too. "I made a choice. I chose to be here." "You're 19 years old," Adrian almost shouted, and then paused as if his own words had struck him. He covered his face with his hands, his voice coming out muffled, broken. "My God, you're 19 and I just—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The guilt was written in every line of his body, in the way his shoulders fell, in the way he seemed to have aged 10 years in a matter of minutes. Clara pulled the sheet tighter, feeling a different pain now. Not physical, but emotional. The pain of being seen for the first time in her life and then being treated like a mistake, like a regret. "I'm not a child," she said, her voice firm despite the tears. "I know very well what I chose, and I chose you, not because you're rich, not because you could give me something, but because when you looked at me I felt real." Adrian let his hands fall, revealing a face destroyed by emotions he clearly didn't know how to process. He approached the bed slowly, as if afraid of scaring her, and sat on the edge, keeping a respectful distance but looking directly at her. "Clara," he began, and his voice was calmer now, but loaded with deep sadness. "You deserved better than this. You deserved candles and flowers and someone who truly loved you, not this, not a hotel suite with a stranger who's so broken inside he doesn't even know how to fix himself." "And what if I didn't want perfection?" Clara asked, wiping the tears with the back of her hand. "What if I just wanted something real, even if it was imperfect, even if it was wrong?" Adrian watched her for a long moment, and Clara saw the struggle happening inside him, between the controlled man he'd trained his whole life to be and the vulnerable man he really was beneath all those layers of protection. "Why me?" he finally asked, echoing the question she'd asked before. "Of all people, why choose to give this to someone like me?" Clara took a deep breath, trying to find the right words, not to comfort him, but to tell the truth. "Because you saw me," she said simply. "Because when you looked at me in that ballroom, you didn't just see a waitress, you saw someone, and I'd been invisible for so long that when someone finally saw me, I wanted to give that person something I'd never given anyone else. I wanted to be seen completely." Adrian closed his eyes, and Clara saw a single tear escape, sliding down his cheek before he quickly wiped it away. When he opened his eyes again, there was a vulnerability there she hadn't seen before. "I've been invisible too," he confessed, his voice hoarse, "for years, surrounded by people but completely alone. My ex-wife used to say I was like a statue, beautiful to look at but cold to the touch, and she was right. I built so many walls around myself that I forgot how to let anyone in." He paused, looking at his hands, at the blood that was no longer there but seemed to haunt him anyway. "Until you," he continued. "When I looked at you, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Fear. Fear that maybe, just maybe, you could see through all those walls. And that terrified me. But it also made me feel alive." Clara felt something break inside her chest, not from pain but from recognition. Recognition that this man, with all his money and power, was as broken as she was. As lonely. As desperate for a real connection that he too was willing to risk everything for one night of truth. She slowly extended her hand, and Adrian looked at it as if it were an offering he didn't deserve. But he took it. His fingers intertwined with hers, and Clara felt the trembling in his hands. "I don't regret it," she said firmly. "Yes, it hurt, and maybe it wasn't how I imagined, but I don't regret choosing you." Adrian squeezed her hand, and she saw the struggle in his eyes, between believing her and believing the guilt consuming him. "You should," he said, but there was less conviction in his voice now. "But I don't," Clara repeated, and this time she moved closer, letting the sheet fall slightly, not seductively but vulnerably. "Because for the first time, I wanted something for myself, not for my mother." not to pay bills. For me. And that matters. Adrian looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, as if he finally understood what she was saying. Slowly he raised his free hand and touched her face, wiping away the tears that still fell. "You matter," he said, and for the first time since everything had happened, there was certainty in his voice. "More than you know, and I'm sorry for not being more careful, for not asking, for not doing this the way you deserved." "Then show me," Clara whispered. "Show me the way you think I deserve." Adrian hesitated, clearly torn between the desire to comfort her and the fear of hurting her more. But then, slowly, he moved closer and kissed her, not with the desperate passion from before, but with something softer, more careful. A kiss that said, "You matter," without needing words. He gently laid her back on the pillows and lay beside her, pulling her into his arms protectively. Clara rested her head on his chest, listening to his racing heart gradually begin to calm. Adrian stroked her hair in slow, repetitive, almost meditative movements. "Tell me about her," Adrian said after a long silence. "Your mother." Clara closed her eyes, letting the memories come. "She was always strong," Clara began, her voice soft. "Raised me alone after my father left us, worked 3 jobs to give me a decent life. Never complained, never gave up. And now she's fighting something that not even all her strength can beat. And I feel so powerless." Adrian held her tighter against him. "You're not powerless," he said. "You're here. You're fighting. That's more than most would do." "But it's not enough," Clara whispered, and the pain in her voice was palpable. "It's never enough." Adrian gently turned her so he could look into her eyes. "Then let me help," he said, and before she could protest, he continued. "Not as charity, not as guilt, but because I want to, because you matter to me." Clara studied him, searching for signs of pity or obligation, but all she saw was sincerity. "Why?" she asked. "You barely know me." Adrian smiled sadly. "Maybe that's why. Maybe you're the first person in years who sees me as I really am. Not as the billionaire, not as the failed ex-husband, just me." And in that moment, lying together amid stained sheets and broken hearts, Clara realized something fundamental. Sometimes the deepest connections are born in the most unlikely places. And sometimes, being seen is the greatest gift anyone can give. She didn't know what would come next, didn't know if this would last beyond that night. But in that moment, wrapped in the arms of an equally broken man, Clara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could both find some form of healing in each other, even if it was only for a few more hours. The hours that followed were strange, not uncomfortable, but charged with an intimacy that neither of them knew how to navigate. Adrian insisted on taking care of Clara with an attention that bordered on obsession. He led her to the luxurious bathroom of the suite, prepared a hot bath in the marble tub, adding aromatic salts that promised to relax tense muscles. Clara tried to protest, to say she could do this herself, but he simply shook his head and said, with gentle firmness, that she needed to let him do this, that he needed to do this. So she let him. Let him help her into the hot water, let him carefully wash her hair, let him run a soft sponge over her skin with movements so delicate they seemed like a silent apology. There was nothing sexual in that moment. It was pure tenderness, pure care, as if Adrian were trying to compensate for the pain he'd caused with each gentle gesture. When they finally left the bathroom, Adrian wrapped her in a hotel robe that was too big for her, making her look like a child wearing adult clothes. He changed the bedsheets without saying a word, and Clara watched in silence, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and sadness. Gratitude because he cared enough to do this. Sadness because she knew that when the sun rose, all of this would be just a memory. They returned to bed, but this time there was no urgency, no burning desire. There were just 2 human beings lying side by side, trying to understand what it meant to be so close and yet so lost. Adrian pulled her into his arms again, and Clara nestled against his chest, listening to his heart beat in a constant rhythm that calmed her. He continued stroking her hair, and the silence between them was comfortable now, without the tension from before. "I want to do it again," Clara said suddenly, surprising them both with the declaration. Adrian immediately tensed. "Clara, no. You need time to recover. Not now," she clarified, turning to face him. "But eventually. I want to try again. The right way this time." Adrian looked at her with a complex expression, part concern, part hope, part fear. "Why?" he asked, genuinely confused. "After what happened, why would you want to—" "Because it wasn't your fault," Clara interrupted him. "And it wasn't mine. It was just something that happened. And I don't want that to be my only memory. I don't want that pain to be the only thing I remember when I think about the first time someone touched me like I mattered." Adrian closed his eyes, and Clara saw the struggle happening inside him again. When he opened them, there was a determination there she hadn't seen before. "Then let's do it differently," he said. "No rush, no expectations. Just the two of us, learning." Clara felt something warm inside her chest. It wasn't sexual desire. It was something deeper, more frightening. It was the feeling of being understood, of being respected, of mattering. "Can I kiss you?" Adrian asked, and the way he asked for permission, even after everything they'd already shared, made Clara smile for the first time since the scream. "You can," she replied. The kiss was different from all the previous ones. There was no urgency, no desperation. It was slow, exploratory, almost reverent. Adrian kissed her, as if he had all the time in the world, as if each second mattered, as if she were something precious he was afraid to break. His hands slid across her face, through her hair, down her shoulders and back, but always stopping before going too far. He was establishing boundaries without words, showing her that he could control himself, that he could be patient. Clara, in turn, let her own hands explore. She traced the lines of his muscles, the scars that told stories, the way he trembled slightly when she touched certain places. She was learning his body the same way he'd learned hers, not in a hurry, but with genuine curiosity. When the kiss finally ended, both were breathing a little faster, but it wasn't the desperate breathing from before. It was just life, just confirmation that they were both there, alive, feeling. "Thank you," Clara whispered. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For not treating me like a mistake." Adrian pulled her closer, resting his chin on top of her head. "You were never a mistake, Clara. Maybe the rightest thing that's happened in my life in a long time." They stayed like that for a long time, simply existing together. But then, slowly, Clara felt the atmosphere change, felt the heat begin to grow again, felt her body respond to his proximity in a way that surprised her. After everything that had happened, she still wanted him, still wanted to try. "Adrian," she said softly, and he immediately pulled back to look at her, concern evident in his eyes. "What is it? Are you okay? Are you in pain?" "No," she said quickly. I want to try, now, if you want to." Adrian studied her carefully, looking for signs that she was forcing herself, that she was trying to prove something. But all he saw was sincerity. "Are you sure?" he asked. "We can wait. We can wait as long as you need." "I'm sure," Clara replied, and it was true. The physical pain had diminished to a mild discomfort. But more than that, she didn't want fear to win. Didn't want that scream of pain to be the last thing they both remembered when they thought about that night. Adrian nodded slowly, but Clara could see he was nervous. More nervous than he'd been before, because now he knew how much he could hurt her. Now he knew he needed to be even more careful. He kissed her again slowly, giving her time to change her mind. His hands moved over her body with an almost painful softness, touching, caressing, but always alert to any sign of discomfort. Clara allowed herself to relax, allowed herself to feel each touch, each kiss, each moment. When Adrian finally touched her more intimately, Clara held her breath, not from pain, but from anticipation. He paused immediately. "It's okay," she assured him. "Continue." Adrian continued, but with a patience Clara didn't know was possible. He wasn't in a hurry. He didn't seem to care how long it took. All that mattered was that she was comfortable, that she felt safe. And slowly, very slowly, Clara felt something different begin to grow. It wasn't pain. It was something warmer, more intense, more pleasurable. She arched her back instinctively and heard Adrian let out a low sound of approval. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Yes," she breathed. "Very okay." Adrian continued his touches, and Clara felt herself losing control, not in a frightening way, but in a liberating one. She let her body react naturally, let sounds escape without censoring them, let herself simply feel without thinking, without analyzing, without being afraid. When Adrian finally positioned himself over her again, Clara was ready. This time, when he entered slowly, there was no scream of pain. There was only a sigh, of relief, of pleasure, of something finally making sense. "Look at me," Adrian asked, and Clara opened her eyes, meeting his. And there, looking into the grey eyes that truly saw her, Clara felt something complete itself inside her. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual, something that went beyond words or explanations. Adrian moved slowly, carefully, always alert to any sign of discomfort. But all Clara felt was warmth, was connection, was the feeling of finally understanding what all those songs and books tried to describe when they talked about intimacy. "Adrian," she whispered, and he leaned in to kiss her, muffling any other words. They moved together in a rhythm that was theirs alone, discovering what worked, what felt good, what made them both tremble with pleasure. And when Clara finally felt something break inside her, a wave of pleasure that caught her completely off guard, she clung to Adrian's shoulders as if he were the only solid thing in a crumbling world. Adrian followed moments later, murmuring her name against her neck, trembling with the intensity of what he felt. They stayed like that for a long moment, still connected, still breathing heavily, still processing what had just happened. When Adrian finally pulled away and lay beside her, pulling her into his arms, Clara felt tears stream down her face again. But this time they weren't tears of pain or humiliation. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of something that felt dangerously close to love. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. Adrian kissed the top of her head. "I'm the one who should thank you," he replied, "for trusting me, for giving me a second chance to do it right." Clara smiled, feeling exhaustion finally catching up with her. Her body ached in a different way now, not from pain, but from exertion, from having been used the way it was designed, and it was a good ache. "Stay with me tonight," Adrian asked, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that made Clara's heart tighten. "Just stay." "I'll stay," Clara promised, and it was a promise she intended to keep, at least for that night. Because tomorrow the sun would rise and reality would return. But for now, wrapped in each other's arms, they could pretend the rest of the world didn't exist. That it was just the two of them. And that, maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Clara woke slowly, confused for a moment about where she was. The soft morning light filtered through the heavy curtains, creating a golden glow that made everything seem unreal, almost dreamlike. She felt the warmth of another body beside her, the weight of an arm over her waist, the steady breathing of someone still asleep. And then, everything came back. Adrian, the sweet, the pain, the pleasure, the complete surrender of herself to a stranger who somehow no longer felt like a stranger. She slowly turned her head and watched him. Adrian slept with an expression different from the one he wore awake. The tension lines around his eyes had softened, his jaw was relaxed, and he looked younger, almost vulnerable. Clara felt something tighten in her chest as she watched him, a mixture of tenderness and fear. Tenderness for having shared something so intimate with this man. Fear because she knew she would eventually have to leave that bed, that suite, and return to reality where men like Adrian and women like her didn't mix. As if feeling the weight of her gaze, Adrian began to stir. His eyes opened slowly, and when they focused on her, a small, genuine smile curved his lips. The kind of smile Clara imagined few people had the privilege of seeing. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," Clara replied, feeling a strange shyness. It was ridiculous to be shy after everything they'd shared, but still, she felt exposed under that soft morning light. Adrian raised his hand and touched her face gently, tracing her jawline with his thumb. "Are you okay?" he asked, and Clara knew he wasn't just asking about how she'd slept. He was asking about everything: the pain, the discomfort, the emotional consequences of having given something so precious to someone she barely knew. "I'm okay," she answered honestly. "A little sore, but okay." Adrian frowned, concern evident in his eyes. "I can order something for that. Medicine, a hot compress, whatever you need." Clara shook her head, touching his chest lightly. "You don't need to. It's a pain that's bearable. Almost good in a way. It reminds me it was real." Adrian studied her for a long moment and then pulled her closer, wrapping her completely in his arms. Clara rested her head on his chest, listening to his heart beating in a steady rhythm. "It was real," he confirmed softly. "More real than anything I've felt in years." They stayed like that for a while, simply existing with each other. No rush, nowhere to be. But eventually reality began to seep in. Clara felt her stomach rumble lightly, and Adrian must have heard because he laughed. A low, genuine laugh that made his chest vibrate under her ear. "Hungry?" he asked. "A little," Clara admitted, feeling her cheeks warm. Adrian pulled away and reached for the phone on the nightstand. "What do you like to eat for breakfast?" Clara hesitated. She wasn't used to being asked what she'd like. She was used to eating what was available, what was cheap, what could last longer. "Anything is fine," she said. Adrian put down the phone and looked at her with a serious expression. "Clara, this isn't your normal life. Here right now you can have whatever you want. So tell me, what would you like to eat?" The question was simple, but carried greater weight. It was about more than just food. It was about choice, about having permission to want something. "Pancakes," Clara said finally, feeling silly, "with strawberries, and maybe scrambled eggs, and bacon, and orange juice." Adrian smiled, and it was a warm, approving smile. "Pancakes with strawberries," he repeated, and then called room service, placing an order that seemed to include half the menu. While they waited for the food to arrive, Adrian insisted that Clara take another bath to help with the pain. This time she went alone, but not before he made it clear that if she needed anything, he'd be there. Clara locked herself in the luxurious bathroom and let the hot water wash away not just the sweat and discomfort, but also some of the confusion she felt. She looked at herself in the fogged mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. There was something different there, in her eyes, in the way she carried herself. She seemed more present, more alive, as if something that had been asleep for years had finally awakened. When she came out of the bathroom, wrapped again in the oversized robe, she found Adrian sitting on the living room sofa, wearing only sweatpants, his bare torso exposed. He was looking out the window, watching the snow-covered mountains, and there was a thoughtful expression on his face that made her pause. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. Adrian turned to look at her, and for a moment he seemed to want to lie, give an easy answer. But then he sighed and told the truth. "I'm thinking about how to let you go when this ends." The words hit Clara like a punch to the stomach, not because they were cruel, but because they acknowledged the truth they were both avoiding, that this, whatever it was, had an expiration date. She walked to the sofa and sat beside him, keeping a small space between them. "And when does this end?" she asked, even though she was afraid of the answer. Adrian ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Clara was beginning to recognize as a sign of frustration or internal conflict. "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to say when you walk out that door because it would be easier, cleaner, less complicated. And the other part." Adrian looked at her, and Clara saw so much raw emotion in his eyes that she almost pulled back. "The other part wants to keep you here, wants to discover everything about you, wants to wake up with you every day and find out if what I feel is real or just temporary loneliness." Clara felt tears burn behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "I can't be kept, Adrian. I have responsibilities. My mother, work, bills to pay. I can't just disappear into your world and pretend mine doesn't exist." "I know," he said quickly, "and I'm not asking for that. I need you to know that last night wasn't just sex for me. It wasn't just loneliness looking for temporary relief. It was you. It was about you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Clara wanted to believe them. Wanted to believe that a man like Adrian could genuinely care about someone like her, but years of disappointment and survival had taught her to be cautious. "It wasn't for the money," she said suddenly, needing him to know this. "When I came here with you, when I chose on this, it wasn't because I wanted something from you. It was because for the first time, I wanted something for myself. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to matter, even if it was just for one night." Adrian turned completely to her, taking both her hands in his. "You matter," he said intensely. "Not just for one night, but really. And I know it seems crazy. I know we've only known each other for a few hours, but Clara, I can't just let you go and pretend none of this happened." "So what are you suggesting?" Clara asked, feeling her heart race. Adrian hesitated, clearly struggling with something internally. Before he could answer, a knock on the door announced the arrival of breakfast. He got up to answer it, and Clara took the moment to try to calm the whirlwind of emotions inside her. When Adrian returned, pushing a cart full of food that seemed like enough to feed a small family, he had a more controlled expression, more like the man she'd met in the ballroom, confident, in control, but with an underlying vulnerability that only she seemed able to see. They ate in relatively comfortable silence, but Clara could feel the unspoken words hovering between them. Finally, after finishing her pancake, she couldn't take it anymore. "Adrian, we need to talk about what happens now." He put his fork on his plate and looked directly at her. "I want to keep seeing you," he said without beating around the bush. "Not casually, not just for sex. I want to really know you, want to know everything about you. Your dreams, your fears, what makes you smile, what keeps you up at night." "But our worlds are completely different," Clara protested. "You live in hotel suites that cost more per night than I make in a month. You have companies, responsibilities, a lifestyle I can't even imagine. And I work 3 jobs just to keep up with bills. How could this work?" Adrian leaned forward, the intensity back in his eyes. "I don't care about the difference in worlds. I care about the fact that when I'm with you, I feel human again, I feel real, and that's more valuable than all the money I have." Clara felt a tear escape, sliding down her cheek before she could stop it. Adrian stood and knelt in front of her, wiping the tear away with his thumb. "Let me help you," he said softly. "With your mother, with the bills, with whatever you need. Not as charity, not as obligation, but because I want to, because you matter to me." "I can't accept your money," Clara said, shaking her head. "I can't be kept. I need to maintain my dignity." "Then don't think of it as being kept," Adrian replied. "Think of it as an investment in someone I believe in, someone who deserves a chance to not just survive, but live." Clara looked at him through her tears, seeing the sincerity on his face. Part of her wanted to accept immediately, wanted to surrender to the fantasy that maybe, just maybe, she could have this. Someone who cared, someone who helped her carry the weight. But the other part, the part that had survived alone for so long, hesitated. "I need to think," she said finally. "This is all too much, too fast. I need time to process." Adrian nodded, clearly disappointed but respecting her boundaries. "How much time do you need?" Clara looked at the clock and realized with a jolt that it was almost noon. She should have returned to the hotel where she was staying hours ago. Her shift at the event had ended, and she had another job waiting in Denver early tomorrow. "I need to go," she said, and the reality of the words hit her like a bucket of cold water. Adrian tensed. "Now?" "Eventually, yes. I have responsibilities. Real life waiting." Adrian walked back to the window, his back tense. Clara could see the struggle happening inside him, between wanting to keep her there and respecting her autonomy. "At least let me give you a way to contact me," he said without turning. "A number, an email, something." Clara hesitated but then nodded even though he couldn't see. "Okay." Adrian turned, and the relief on his face was palpable. He took a business card from his wallet and wrote something on the back before handing it to her. "This is my personal number," he said. "Not business, personal. Only a few people have this number." Clara took the card, feeling its weight in her hand. Not the physical weight, but the weight of what it represented. A door, a choice, a possible future. "Thank you," she whispered. Adrian gently held her chin, making her look at him. "Don't disappear," he asked, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that broke her. "Please, just don't disappear." Clara couldn't promise that. Couldn't promise she'd call, that she'd come back, that she'd choose to enter this complicated and frightening world, but she also couldn't lie to him. "I'll think about it," she said, and it was the only truth she could offer. Adrian kissed her, long and deep, as if trying to engrave the taste of her in his memory. And when they finally separated, Clara felt like she was leaving part of herself there in that suite. But she still left, because sometimes leaving is the only way to find out if something is worth coming back to. 5 days had passed since that morning in the suite, and Clara couldn't stop thinking about Adrian. She'd kept the business card at the bottom of her purse, but touched it constantly, as if it were a talisman, proof that all of it had really happened. Part of her wanted to call, wanted to hear his voice again, feel that connection that both scared and attracted her. But the other part, the practical part, the part that had survived alone for so long, said to forget it, to accept it as one magical night that would never repeat itself and move on. But moving on was harder than she'd imagined. Everything reminded her of Adrian. The smell of expensive coffee that passed by her on the street, the sound of luxury cars accelerating, the way snow still fell over Denver, creating that heavy silence she associated with that night. She found herself distracted at work, missing orders, making wrong change, and her boss had already warned her twice. Clara knew she needed to focus, but it was as if part of her had stayed in that suite, and she was functioning at only half capacity. And then, on Friday, everything changed. Clara was leaving the hospital where she'd visited her mother when her cell phone rang. It was an unknown number, but local. She hesitated before answering, but something made her accept the call. "Hello? Clara?" The voice was familiar, but it wasn't Adrian. It was a woman, professional, efficient. "My name is Margaret. I'm Mr. Castellane's assistant. He would like to meet with you today, if possible. Would you be available for coffee at 4 this afternoon?" Clara felt her heart race. Adrian had sent his assistant to contact her. Did that mean he was thinking about her too? Or was it just business? Yes, I think so," Clara replied, hating how insecure her voice sounded. "Great. There's a coffee shop called Stellar Grounds on 16th Avenue. Mr. Castellane will meet you there at 4. He's reserved a private space in the back." The call ended before Clara could ask any questions. She looked at her phone, processing what had just happened. Adrian wanted to see her. After 5 days of silence, he'd finally made contact, and she didn't know if she should be relieved or terrified. 3 hours later, Clara entered Stellar Grounds wearing the best clothes she had: clean jeans, a simple but presentable blouse, and a coat that hid most of the wear. It was nothing compared to what women in Adrian's world probably wore, but it was the best she could do. The coffee shop was elegant but not intimidating. Dark wood, soft light, the rich smell of freshly ground coffee in the air. A staff member greeted her immediately, clearly expecting her, and guided her to a private room in the back. When the door opened, Clara saw Adrian. He was sitting in a leather armchair, wearing a casual sweater and jeans, nothing like the tailored suits she'd imagined he always wore. When he saw her, he stood immediately, and Clara saw relief flood his face. "You came," he said, and there was so much gratitude in his voice that Clara felt her chest tighten. "You called," she replied simply. Adrian gestured to the armchair across from his, and Clara sat, aware of the space between them. Not too close, not too far. Safe. "I didn't know if you'd call," Adrian began, running his hand through his hair in that nervous gesture she already recognized. "So, I took the liberty of finding a way to contact you. I hope it wasn't too invasive." Clara shook her head. "It wasn't. I just needed time to think." "And?" Adrian leaned forward, his eyes fixed on her. "Did you think?" Clara took a deep breath. She'd spent the last 5 days doing exactly that, thinking, analyzing, questioning every aspect of that night and what it meant. "I did," she confirmed, "and I still don't know if this is a good idea. Our worlds are so different, Adrian. I don't know if I can navigate yours, and I don't know if you can understand mine." Adrian nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. "You're right," he said. "Our worlds are different, but maybe that's exactly why it works. Maybe I need someone who keeps me anchored in reality. And maybe you need someone who can help you see that you deserve more than just surviving." Before Clara could respond, the door opened and a staff member brought a tray with coffee and various pastries. She placed everything on the table between them and left discreetly, closing the door behind her. Adrian poured coffee for both of them, and Clara noticed how his hands trembled slightly. He was nervous. The powerful billionaire was nervous because of her, and that was simultaneously empowering and frightening. "I have a proposal," Adrian said after taking a sip of coffee, "and I want you to hear all of it before you respond. Can you do that?" Clara nodded, holding the warm cup between her hands. "Your mother needs treatment," he began. "Treatment you can't afford alone, no matter how many jobs you work. I want to pay for it. All the treatment, all the necessary doctors, everything." Clara started to protest, but Adrian raised his hand. "Let me finish," he asked. "In return, I want you to let me be present. Not as a distant benefactor, but as someone in your life. Lunches, dinners, coffee, time together, really getting to know each other. No sexual pressure, no expectations beyond just being together." "That sounds like a business deal," Clara said, feeling a pang of disappointment. Adrian shook his head vigorously. "It's not. It's the opposite. It's me being honest about what I want and establishing clear boundaries so you feel safe. I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything. I don't want you to be with me out of obligation or gratitude. I want you to be with me because you choose to be." Clara studied him, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden motives, but all she saw was sincerity. "And if I don't want to be with you anymore?" she asked. "If I decide this isn't working?" "Then you stop," Adrian said without hesitation. "Your mother's treatment continues, no conditions, but our, whatever this is, ends. No drama, no consequences." Clara took a sip of coffee, buying time to process. It was a generous offer, too generous. Part of her screamed that there was a trap, that no one offered something like this without wanting something in return. But when she looked at Adrian, she saw only a lonely man who was trying, in the only way he knew how, to connect with someone. "Why me?" she asked again, needing to understand. "Of all the women you could have, why choose to complicate your life with someone like me?" Adrian put his cup on the table and leaned forward, eliminating some of the space between them. "Because you're the only person in years who's made me feel something real," he said intensely. "Because when I'm with you, I don't have to be the billionaire, don't have to be the failed ex-husband, don't have to be anything but me. And that, Clara, that's something priceless." Clara felt tears burn behind her eyes. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe. "I need boundaries," she said finally. "Clear boundaries, because last time was too intense, too fast, and I can't lose myself in this." "Then set the boundaries," Adrian responded immediately. "Tell me what you need and I'll respect them." Clara thought for a moment, trying to organize her chaotic thoughts. "Nothing sexual," she began. "For now. I mean, at least until I know this is real, that it's not just desire or loneliness." Adrian nodded. "I completely agree. And I still work," Clara continued. "I'm not giving up my jobs just because you're paying for my mother's treatment. I need to maintain my independence." "Understood. And if either of us feels this isn't working, we need to be honest. No games, no manipulation, just honesty." Adrian extended his hand across the table, and Clara hesitated only a moment before placing hers over his. The touch sent a familiar spark up her arm, reminding her of everything they'd shared that night. "Honesty," he repeated. "I promise." They stayed like that for a long moment, hands intertwined, gazes locked, both aware they were entering unknown territory. But there was also something exciting about it. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could build something real. "So it's a deal?" Adrian asked. Clara took a deep breath, weighing one last time all the consequences, and then, with a mixture of fear and hope, she nodded. "It's a deal." The smile that lit up Adrian's face was genuine, completely transforming his features. He looked years younger, almost boyish, and Clara felt her own smile responding. "When can I see you again?" he asked, and there was an adorable eagerness in his voice. "I have Sunday off," Clara said. for the first time in weeks. "Sunday lunch, then," Adrian suggested. "Somewhere quiet where we can really talk." "I'd like that," Clara admitted. They spent the next hour talking, not about anything deep, just getting to know the small details about each other. Adrian talked about his complicated childhood with an absent father and impossible expectations. Clara shared stories about growing up with a strong single mother who never gave up, no matter how hard things got. And somewhere between the coffee cooling and the pastries being forgotten, Clara realized something important. She was beginning to like this man, not just the physical desire they'd shared, but him as a person, his vulnerabilities, his flaws, the way he really listened when she spoke. When they finally stood to leave, Adrian hesitated. Can I hug you?" he asked, and the way he asked for permission, even after everything they'd shared, made Clara's heart melt a little more. "You can," she said. Adrian pulled her into his arms, and Clara allowed herself to relax against his chest, listening to his heart beating in a steady rhythm. The hug was comfortable, safe, without the sexual tension from before. It was just two human beings seeking comfort in each other. When they separated, Adrian touched her face gently. "Sunday," he said. "I'll pick you up at 11? "Sunday," Clara confirmed. And when she left that coffee shop, with the business card still in her purse but now with a real date set, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to make the risk worthwhile. Sundays had become sacred. 3 weeks had passed since that coffee, and Clara and Adrian had developed a routine: quiet lunches at discreet restaurants, walks through the park when weather permitted, and long conversations about everything and nothing at the same time. Adrian had kept his promise. There was no pressure, no expectations beyond simply being present. He'd paid for Clara's mother's treatment, who was already showing signs of improvement, and never mentioned the money as if it was something she owed him. But with each meeting, the tension grew. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of tension that made hearts race when hands accidentally touched, the kind that made breathing stop when their gazes locked a little longer than necessary, the kind that kept Clara awake at night, remembering not just the pain of that first time, but also the pleasure of the second, and wondering when, or if, it would happen again. She could see Adrian felt the same, saw it in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, in the way his hand lingered a second longer when helping her out of the car, in the way his breathing quickened when she leaned too close. He was controlling himself, respecting the boundaries she'd established, but Clara could feel the latent desire beneath the surface, waiting to explode. And then came the Sunday night that would change everything. Adrian had invited her to dinner, not at a restaurant, but at his penthouse in Denver. Clara had hesitated, knowing that going to his territory carried different implications than meeting him in public places, but she also knew she was ready to take the next step, ready to find out if what they felt was real or just a fantasy that would crumble under the light of reality. When Clara arrived at the penthouse, Adrian greeted her personally at the door. He wore casual clothes, a blue button-down shirt with sleeves rolled up to his elbows and dark jeans, but still managed to look devastatingly attractive. His eyes lit up when he saw her, and the smile that curved his lips was genuine, warm. "You look beautiful," he said, and it wasn't just an empty compliment, it was an observation, said with an admiration that made Clara blush. She wore a simple dress, nothing extravagant, just something that made her feel pretty without trying too hard. But the way Adrian looked at her made her feel like she was wearing haute couture. "Thank you," she replied, entering the penthouse. The space was impressive, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Denver lit up at night, minimalist but elegant decor, and a sense of space that contrasted completely with the small, cramped apartment where Clara lived. But what caught her attention most was the table set up near the windows, lit candles, fresh flowers, two place settings arranged with care. "Did you cook?" Clara asked, surprised to see Adrian gesture toward the kitchen. "I tried," he admitted with an embarrassed smile. "I don't promise it's perfect, but I put effort into it." Clara felt something melt inside her chest. The image of Adrian, billionaire, powerful businessman, in the kitchen trying to prepare dinner for her was both comical and deeply touching. "I'm sure it's perfect," she said softly. They dined slowly, savoring not just the food, which was surprisingly good, but the company. Adrian told stories about past culinary disasters that made her laugh until tears ran down her face. Clara shared childhood memories of when her mother taught her to cook with what they had available. And somewhere between the wine and the laughter, Clara realized she was completely comfortable. There was no nervousness, no feeling of being out of place. There was just them. After dinner, Adrian guided her to the balcony, a spacious area overlooking the city, heated by strategically positioned heaters that kept the cold March night at bay. They sat in an armchair large enough for two, and Clara naturally nestled against him, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched the city lights blink like earthbound stars. "I could stay like this forever," Adrian murmured, his fingers absently playing with strands of her hair. "That would be a long forever," Clara joked, but her voice was soft, dreamy. Adrian gently turned her face up, forcing her to look at him. The intensity in his eyes stole the air from her lungs. "I wouldn't mind," he said, and there was no joking in his voice, just raw sincerity. Clara felt her heart race. She knew what was about to happen, could feel it in the way the air between them changed, becoming denser, charged with electricity, and this time she wasn't afraid. "Kiss me," she whispered, and it was both a request and permission. Adrian didn't need to be asked twice. He leaned in and captured her lips in a kiss that started soft but quickly deepened. There was no rush, but there was passion, years of loneliness being poured into each touch, each caress. Clara turned in the seat, positioning herself facing him, her knees on either side of his hips, and Adrian groaned low against her mouth, his hands sliding down her back, holding her closer. The kiss seemed endless, deepening, intensifying, until they were both breathing heavily, hearts beating in frantic unison. When they finally separated, Adrian rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed, trying to regain control. "Clara," he said, his voice hoarse, "if you don't want this right now, you need to tell me. Because if this continues, I won't be able to stop." Clara knew this was her moment, her chance to pull back, to maintain the boundaries she'd established, to go slow. But she didn't want to go slow, not anymore. 3 weeks of knowing this man had proven he wasn't just desire or loneliness. It was real, and she was ready to explore it completely. "Don't stop," she whispered, echoing the same words from that first night, but this time there was no fear, just certainty. Adrian opened his eyes, and what Clara saw there made her tremble, not from fear but from anticipation. There was desire, yes, but also something deeper, something that looked a lot like love, even if neither had the courage to say it out loud yet. He stood, carrying her with him, and Clara wrapped her legs around his waist instinctively. Adrian carried her back inside, through the living room, to the bedroom. But this time, everything felt different. There was no nervousness, no uncertainty from that first time. There were just two bodies that already knew each other, seeking reconnection. Adrian placed her on the bed carefully, and then simply watched her for a moment, his eyes traveling over every inch of her, as if memorizing. "You're so beautiful," he said, and there was reverence in his voice. Clara reached her arms out to him, and Adrian came, covering her body with his, but supporting his weight on his arms so as not to crush her. He kissed her again, long and deep, while his hands began to explore. This time there was no rush. Each button unbuttoned was savored. Each inch of exposed skin was worshipped with kisses and caresses. When they were finally both naked, Clara didn't feel the vulnerability of the first time. She felt power, felt that she was desired not just physically, but emotionally. And that made all the difference. Adrian touched her in ways that made her arch her back, sounds escaping from her throat that she didn't know she was capable of making. He seemed to know every sensitive spot, every place that made her tremble. And when she begged, really begged, for more, he finally gave in. This time, when he entered her, there was no pain, just a sensation of completeness, of being exactly where she should be. Clara held his shoulders, looking directly into his eyes as they moved together in a rhythm that was entirely theirs. "Look at me," Adrian asked when he felt her eyes starting to close. "I want to see you, want to see what I do to you." Clara obeyed, keeping her eyes open even when pleasure began to build. even when every nerve in her body began to sing. She saw the exact moment when Adrian also began to lose control, saw vulnerability cross his face, saw the man behind all the defenses, and when they finally fell together over that precipice of pleasure, it was with each other's names on their lips, with eyes still locked, with the certainty that this was real. Afterward, lying intertwined, sweaty and satisfied, Adrian lazily caressed her arm, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on her skin. "Oh, you make me want to be someone better," he said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. Clara turned her head to look at him. "You don't need to be better. You're already enough." Adrian pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "Do you really believe that?" he asked, and there was vulnerability in the question. "I do," Clara replied without hesitation, "because when I'm with you, I also feel enough. And that's a gift." They stayed like that until sleep began to pull at them, intertwined not just physically but emotionally. And when Clara finally closed her eyes, it was with a smile on her lips and certainty in her heart that maybe, just maybe, she'd found something worth risking everything for. Something that looked a lot like love. The happiness lasted exactly 2 weeks. 2 weeks of stolen nights, secret lunches, messages exchanged at all hours of the day. 2 weeks where Clara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have this. A real relationship with a man who saw her, valued her, made her feel like the whole world could crumble and she'd still be okay because he was there. But Adrian's world wasn't made for secrets, and when the truth came out, it came like a tsunami, fast, brutal, and destructive. It started with a photo. Clara was at work, waiting tables at a mid-range restaurant in Denver, when her phone started vibrating incessantly. Messages from numbers she didn't know. Social media notifications that she rarely used exploding with mentions, comments, direct messages. Confused and with a bad feeling forming in her stomach, she asked for a quick break and checked her phone. What she saw made her feel like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. It was a photo of her and Adrian leaving a restaurant 3 nights ago. His hand was on the small of her back, a possessive but affectionate gesture. Both were smiling at each other, clearly oblivious to the world around them. It would have been a beautiful, intimate photo if it wasn't accompanied by a venomous caption, "Billionaire Adrian Castellane seen with new companion." Sources say the girl is only 19 and worked as a waitress. He really doesn't learn, does he? Age difference, he just digging for gold, he just gold digger. The post already had thousands of likes, hundreds of comments. Clara scrolled with trembling hands, seeing strangers dissect her life, her appearance, her intentions. The words gold digger, prostitute, sugar baby, opportunist appeared repeatedly. Some comments were even worse, suggesting explicit things about what she must be doing to deserve the attention of a man like Adrian. Clara felt bile rise in her throat. She ran to the bathroom, locking herself in a stall, and vomited. Not from food, but from humiliation, from exposure, from the way her private life, something so fragile and precious, had been thrown out for the world to judge. Her phone rang. It was Adrian. "Clara, I saw," he said as soon as she answered, his voice tense, controlled, but with a current of anger just beneath the surface. "I'm dealing with it. My legal team is already working to remove the most defamatory posts. I'm going to fix this." "How?" Clara asked, and her voice came out broken. "How are you going to fix the fact that thousands of people now think I'm a prostitute, that I'm with you for the money?" "Because they don't know you," Adrian replied firmly. "They don't know who you really are, and I'm going to make sure they know the truth." "The truth?" Clara almost laughed, but the sound came out more like a sob. "What truth, Adrian? That I really was a virgin when we met, that you paid for my mother's treatment. How exactly is that going to sound when you explain it publicly?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Clara," he began, but she interrupted him. "I need to go, I'm at work. Let's talk later." She hung up before he could respond, and immediately turned off her phone completely. She couldn't deal with more messages, more comments, more judgment. Not now. Clara returned to work, but the rest of the shift was a blur. She felt her co-workers' stares, heard the whispers. Someone had clearly seen the post and spread the news. When the shift finally ended, Her boss called her into the office. "Clara, I need to talk to you," the woman said, and the tone promised nothing good. "I know," Clara replied, too tired to pretend. "You're going to fire me." The boss sighed, looking genuinely uncomfortable. "It's not personal, but with all this publicity, some customers have already complained, said they felt uncomfortable being served by you, and I simply can't risk losing business because of this." Clara nodded, feeling numb. There were no tears, just a tired acceptance that her life was falling apart, and she was powerless to stop it. "I understand," she said. "I'll get my things." When she left the restaurant, it was already night. Snow was beginning to fall again, light and silent. Clara walked aimlessly for a while, not wanting to return to her empty apartment, not wanting to turn on her phone and face the avalanche of hate that probably still awaited her. Eventually, she found herself in front of a familiar building, Adrian's penthouse. She hadn't planned to go there, but her feet seemed to have a will of their own. Before she could change her mind, she pressed the intercom. "Clara?" Adrian's voice came immediately, as if he'd been waiting on the other side. "Come up, please." The elevator seemed to take forever. When the doors finally opened, Adrian was there, waiting. He looked destroyed, hair messed up as if he'd run his hands through it 1,000 times, red eyes, tense jaw. When he saw Clara, relief flooded his face, but was quickly replaced by concern when he really looked at her swollen eyes from crying, at her defeated posture, at the way she seemed smaller than she really was. "Clara," he said, extending his arms, but she pulled back. "Don't," she said, her voice firm despite the tears that were starting to fall again. "If you touch me now, I'll fall apart. And I can't fall apart yet. I need to say some things first." Adrian let his arms fall, but his eyes never left her face. "Then say them. I'm listening." Clara took a deep breath, trying to organize her chaotic thoughts. "I lost my job today," she began, "because of the publicity. And I know you're going to say you can help me financially, that you can fix this. But you can't, Adrian. You can't fix the way people see me now. Can't fix the fact that I'm now known as the 19-year-old gold digger who seduced a billionaire." "That's not who you are," Adrian said intensely. "And I'm going to make everyone know that." "How?" Clara asked, genuinely curious. "How are you going to do that without making everything worse, without exposing every intimate detail of our private life for strangers to judge?" Adrian ran his hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out because I'm not going to let them destroy you. I'm not going to let them turn something beautiful into something dirty. Maybe it would be better if we just stopped," Clara said, and the words came out painful, like shards of glass tearing at her throat. "Maybe if I just disappear from your life, all of this will go away eventually." "No," Adrian said immediately, his voice coming out louder than intended. He moved closer, and this time Clara didn't pull back. "I won't let you go, not like this. Not because cruel people who don't know us decided to judge something they don't understand. But they'll keep judging," Clara said, tears falling freely now. "They always will. Because our worlds really are different, Adrian, and no matter how much we try, there will always be people pointing that out. There will always be someone saying, 'I'm not good enough for you.'" Adrian held her face between his hands, forcing her to look at him. "Then let them talk," he said fiercely, "because their opinion doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is this, us, what we feel for each other. And I know what I feel for you, Clara. I love you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. It was the first time either of them had said it out loud, and the impact was like a punch to Clara's stomach. "You... what?" she whispered. "I love you," Adrian repeated, calmer this time but no less intense. "I love you in a way that scares me, in a way that makes me want to be better. And I'm not going to let a bunch of strangers on the internet take that away from me. From us." Clara sobbed, and finally let Adrian pull her into his arms. She clung to him as if he were the only solid thing in a crumbling world, and Adrian held her as if she were the most precious thing he'd ever possessed. "I love you too," she admitted against his chest, and it was both a relief and a surrender. "And that's why I'm so scared. Because love isn't enough when the whole world is against you." Adrian pulled her back slightly so he could look into her eyes. "Then let's make the world see," he said with determination. Let's show them that love can be enough. That two people from different worlds can build something real. How? A small smile curved Adrian's lips. Let me take care of that, but I need you to trust me, and I need you to stay, to fight for us, as much as I'm going to fight. Clara looked into his eyes and saw not just determination, but also fear. Fear of losing her. Fear that this really was the end, and in that fear she saw the reflection of her own. Okay, she said finally, I'll stay, I'll fight, but Adrian, I don't want to be saved, I want to be respected. Adrian smiled, a real smile this time. Then let's make them respect you, together. And when he kissed her, there in that penthouse with the whole world judging from outside, Clara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, love really could be enough. Even when everything was against them, especially when everything was against them. In the end, Adrian and Clara understood something the world still needed to learn. True love doesn't choose zip codes, doesn't calculate bank balances, doesn't measure age differences. It simply happens, and when two broken souls find healing in each other, when being seen is worth more than being perfect, when choosing to stay is braver than running away. They would face judgment, there would be difficult days. But in that penthouse, embraced against the whole world, they both discovered that sometimes courage isn't about having all the answers. It's about choosing to love even when no one understands. Because in the end, being seen by the one who truly matters is worth every battle. And maybe deep down this story speaks to us too. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and become a member for early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the super thanks button. Your support makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing stories that move you.